most people have no clue about jury selection in America. In the federal courts, you usually get 30 minutes to pick your jury. They sit down, they give you a name, they give you a list. The judge controls all the questions. You don't get to ask any questions. It's usually generic questions. What does your wife do? What's your last degree of education? Which town do you live in? Now, if you say something that might be pro-defendant, the judge's ears will perk up, and then they'll say, let's do some more review of you, but all the others, not so much. So people don't realize that Stone's lawyers were up against it. Here's what happens in your typical federal case. Now, notably in state court cases, totally different. State court cases are like TV. They're like your TV shows, Bull. They're like those shows you get extensive, expansive voir dire. Not in federal cases, and that's deliberately so. They know that a typical federal jury will convict 85% of the time. So they want the typical jury. They don't want an informed jury. In fact, the only thing they want to get off the jury are people who might be against the government, of course. So if you've had a negative experience with police, negative experience with the criminal justice system, a negative experience in court, or have a negative interpretation of them, then you get removed for cause. Only then. So what you're left with typically as a criminal defense lawyer is you're going to have a pool of jurors that already lean pro-government. Any jurors that are going to be instinctively on your side are going to be removed. Increasingly, unfortunately, your African-American anti-system jurors keep confessing this in jury selection. So they're getting removed. So you're usually stuck with almost overwhelmingly pro-government people. And then you're only given 30 minutes to decide. You barely get their names. Now, I've developed a jury selection system where as soon as I get their names, I'm having my people run it through sophisticated social media databases that include voter profiles, everything they've ever said on Twitter, everything they said on Facebook, various databases. People don't realize this, but there's databases that are gathering all the information you put on YouTube, you put on Facebook, you put on Twitter, you put on other social media mechanisms. And for over half the country, I can plug in somebody's name and give them a complete profile of what magazines they've ordered. I have a very detailed sense of it, but almost no other lawyers are doing this. I'm one of the only lawyers doing this, and I had to do it because I have so many federal cases where I'm basically throwing a dart at the wall to guess which juror is against me instinctively.
But Robert, are you saying? I mean, you're literally saying that when they bring in the jury pool, like I was summoned for jury duty, but I couldn't do it because I'm a lawyer. But I still went to court to see how it went, and there were 300 people in a room. They got filtered down and they got interviewed. But are you literally saying that that
never happens in federal criminal cases, not in the United States, almost never.
How many of the pool? How many are you dealing with as a pool to select the 12 from?
That's where they start the bias. So the way they do it is they try to get it down to so few people that the court says, well, I can't really strike anybody for cause because then we're out of jurors. So what they try to do is usually the average is 60, and they pick 60. And so there's basically you're going to have 10 strikes. The government's going to have 6 strikes. It depends on the case. Sometimes you have a few more, a few less, but basically 16 peremptory strikes, which are not for cause, just anybody you don't like. So that leaves 44 jurors. And so you're usually going to have 3 alternates. So that means you have about 29 jurors. Theoretically, you can strike. But out of that 29, 8 or 9 are going to be pro-defense jurors who out themselves that the court strikes for cause. That leaves 20. Of those remaining 20, at least half are going to have severe problems with participating in a jury trial if it's of any length. They're going to have family issues, work issues, health issues, something of that nature. So you're usually usually you can get 2 or 3 jurors struck out of a pool of 60 for cause. That's why you're up against it. You're almost guaranteed to be. It's like you as a defense lawyer, you're sitting there and you're like, bad choice versus worst choice, bad choice versus worst choice.
And does it happen in one day? Does it happen over the course of 2 days?
It happens within an hour. And in federal court, I'll give you an example in the Snipes case. Now, this changed because of some techniques we utilized. Some I can publicly discuss, some are for another day. But going into the Snipes case, the district court judge, chief judge, sold another single division judge. They manipulated the venue pool to do that. He got up and he said, when we first appeared in the case, which was a couple of weeks before the trial, we got it moved a couple of months after that. The judge said, I have been doing jury trials in federal court for 30 years. It's never taken me more than an hour from the time of impanelment to select the jury. That gives you a scope of it. Now, in his case, he ended up doing 3 days of jury selection because we did some things to help cause that. But that's the norm. The norm is half an hour to an hour. The jury comes in around 9:30. Usually you talk about the case from 8:30 to 9:30 in the morning. 9:30, the jury comes in. The judge asks all their generic questions, all to the 60 people there. That gets you to 10:30 or 11. The judge says then, now you get your peremptory strikes. Let's get this done before lunch. I don't want to hold the jury over to lunch. You better not be one of those mean, bad lawyers that holds the jury over to lunch. And that's it. And you're given anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes to select a jury. Okay. And it's insane.
That's actually nuts. That's actually nuts, and really not like anything that I took for granted as being the case based on what I've seen in movies. Because and I've said this, and I've said this before. In Quebec and Canada, we no longer have jury trials for civil matters. So you do commercial litigation, you never deal with jury trials. I didn't realize you don't have the opportunity to go scour social media in any reasonable manner. I didn't realize that it was a prolonged process.
By the way, originally when lawyers were trying to do this, I was threatening a case with it implicitly. They were saying it was illicit juror contact to even try to do so. So you're looking at their Facebook page. They're going to be notified you're looking at their Facebook page. That's a violation. So I got people who are not me to do that research and work and to build up but that gives you an idea for how bad it is. Is this stuff should be required disclosure, period. This is someone who wants to publicly participate in a public action concerning the private freedom and future and fate of an American individual or just a human being. And if they're going to do that, their obligation is to disclose everything that could be a source of bias. Here's the number one factor, too, by the way, biased jurors. Jurors who are biased will never admit it. Jurors who may have a bias but are honest about it won't be biased in their adjudication. That's why I always pick a juror who tells me, I do have this preference. I do have this preference. Now, a third of the time when they're saying that, they're begging to get off the jury because I've seen them flip their preferences depending on which one they think will get them out of there. But putting those ones aside, the ones that are saying, I'm worried about this, I'll take that juror because they're so self-reflective. They'll process that when they're making their decision. They'll go out of their way to make sure that's not motivating them. The problem with the jurors like, oh, no, I have no bias at all. That's almost inherently and necessarily false. That means they either lack inadequate information about the case or lack adequate self-reflection to be a good juror.
But what is the ability to test the answers given by the juror? I'm not biased.
Almost none. None. In fact, the typical judge's question, and I'll give you one great one from the Snipes case, right? He figured out we trapped him with a few questions, and he was really annoyed because we got half the jury pool to admit their bias. But once he figured that out, in the next second category of jurors, he started leading them. And he would say, okay, so you read the newspapers and these had headlines like, west to local community, white men can't judge me. I mean, headlines like that, right? But he was like, a lot of people, they just skim the newspaper, probably didn't really read it in detail. Is that your situation? When you said you read the newspaper, were you just skimming? They'll lead them that's how bad it is. They do it. Now, on the other hand, it was like, I'll give you an example, real world example, Snipes case. A juror said that she watched NPR and she was sort of concerned about aspects of what she heard about how these kind of cases are done. That juror, he took aside for 30 minutes of follow-up questioning. So it gives you an idea, maybe you're biased. Maybe did you hear this? Did you hear that? So the unfortunate reality is what you see on Bull, that happens often in state courts, still to this day. But it does not happen in federal criminal cases almost ever. You have to beg for it and scream for it. Judges make your life living hell for even asking about it. And it's difficult. And a lot of people that are being critical of the Roger Stone counsel, what I tell them is, I've dealt with biased judges. First judge I ran into that I thought was biased threatened to hold me in contempt. The second judge that I thought was biased and said, hey, look, I think there's an honest issue here, had the U.S. Marshals walking up behind me every 2 seconds when he didn't like my arguments. He would just wave them forward just to let me know I'm going to be going down to the Hooskow tonight. And then the third judge, he was just real blunt about it. He was like, if you keep talking, you're going to join your client in prison tonight. I was like, you mean just for advocacy? Is like one more word and you're in prison. That's the reality of these judges have almost carte blanche power. Almost nobody says anything about them. I had a prominent federal judge in a major high profile case communicate in secret with the jury during jury deliberations about a jury question. The court clerk kept it a secret from me. The marshal kept it a secret from me. His law clerks kept it a secret from me. This was a case where the entire courthouse came to watch my closing arguments. Every law clerk from every other part of the case wanted to see it because it was about a year after the Snipes case. So and yet everybody kept it a secret from me. The judge only confessed because he thought one of the jurors would rat him out. Now there was a way, that's the reality of our federal criminal justice system. And a big flaw in it is our entire American legal system. Canada may be the same, but we have a whole separation of powers, except in one area, the licensing of lawyers. The courts write the laws that govern lawyers. The courts control the enforcement branch that disciplines lawyers. And then the court gets to adjudicate itself. They say, hey, were we fair when we came up with those rules and enforced it against this poor schmuck? That creates a problem because the lawyer, who is best equipped to see judicial bias, who's best to advocate against judicial bias, who is best situated to make sure our court systems are at least transparent. So if it turns out there isn't bias, at least it's been adjudicated in a way that feels free and fair and full and open and transparent. It's lawyers, but they're the very people who are given the least incentive to say boo to any judge.
Well, and that's another thing, like being threatened with contempt, that people like say, stick up to the judge. And I don't think people fully appreciate the power that a judge has in the snap of a fingers to hold you in contempt and to literally haul you off. And it's actually crazy. I've never had anything near that type of example. I mean, I've had a judge say, stop talking, Maître Frei, and you do it, but the consequences are you've already said what you have to say. Right. This is a next level. Andrew Starr says, you guys do such a great job together. More, please. Whenever Robert will be free and agree to do this, I will do it every single time, because it is like talking to a talking encyclopedia.